This afternoon, we want to focus our attention on the Scottish realists. And as you may notice from the outline on the board, this will get us making the transition to Immanuel Kant, so that I plan to spend next time, Friday, orienting us in broad contours to Kant before we get into the detailed exposition of what he's doing. So you might anticipate that accordingly. Little attention has been paid to the Scottish realists and their place in the history of philosophy, largely because the scene was dominated by the British empiricists Locke, Berkeley, Hume, against whom Immanuel Kant reacted, yet whose influence persisted in 19th century and in 20th century empiricism. John Stuart Mill and positivism. Yet the Scottish realists were a group of thinkers in the Enlightenment Reformation, in the Edinburgh Circle of the Enlightenment. I'm sorry, Reformation got in there somehow. In the Scottish Enlightenment there in Edinburgh in the late 18th century, whose influence persisted into the 20th century, not only through its effect by virtue of those who came to the United States, powerful influence at Princeton, but even in British thought. So that when we come to early 20th century realism, and I'm thinking particularly of G.E. Moore, we'll find many similarities to the Scottish realists. In fact, some years ago, I traced a whole collection of actual verbal similarities between G.E. Moore and Thomas Reid. And it's one of those vain hopes of a historical article which would change the picture until when I submitted it to the British journal Mind, it came back with note about a recent book that had just appeared that did the same thing. And so that was the end of that little venture. Out of it, I did succeed, though, in getting an autograph on the Dear John letter from the editor, who happened to be Gilbert Ryle at that time, a rather distinguished British man. But Scottish realism, quite a significant movement. And as we'll see at the end of this, a movement that Immanuel Kant was well aware of. So that its influence is not simply in strains of thought that have continued in the direct realist tradition. Now, let me add one other preliminary note, that it's not at all clear that Thomas Reid interprets David Hume aright. He seems to understand Hume to say that there is no basis for believing anything, as if Hume's skepticism was his very last word, rather than belief. And that reading of Hume seems to have been one which persisted in many circles. And I suspect to this day is the popular image of Hume, until you obviously read further. Let me make some comments on 4 topics which Reid addresses. And the first, as you might expect, is that very influential basic theory of ideas, the representational view, the view that the immediate object of our mental awareness is simply the ideas in our minds. The content of our own minds is all we have direct awareness of. That theory, says Reid, is a fiction created by philosophers. And you'll find that that kind of criticism occurring in Reid again and again and again. He feels that common sense, as he calls it, common sense is much closer to the truth of things than the philosophical tradition that has proceeded from Descartes and Locke. Now, by common sense, he seems to mean the beliefs held by every man in the unphilosophical way. But at the same time, his own views seem to echo some of the Aristotelian influence that had been very present in philosophical matters prior to the theory of ideas. So I think you have to say, not that common sense is closer to the truth than philosophy, but common sense is closer to the truth than the theory of ideas. You see, that's where the thing went astray. His point is that ideas do not have secondary qualities. Your ideas don't smell. It's roses that smell. You see? Your ideas aren't dazzlingly bright. It's the light that's dazzlingly bright. And so to talk of the subjectivity of qualities seems to falsify what we seem to know already. Namely, that roses smell and light can dazzle. In more philosophical jargon, he is arguing for a presentational view of perception rather than representational. That is to say, the view that objects are not represented to us by ideas, but are directly presented to the consciousness, so that I have a direct awareness of physical objects. Now, you notice I said direct. This is a theory of direct awareness, direct knowledge, direct consciousness, as distinct from the indirect view of the representational theory. You see? It's called direct realism. Direct realism. Sometimes it gets labeled epistemological monism rather than the dualism of the representational view, which has both ideas and objects that it has to play with. So you'll find it referred to in these very ways. Now, the term realism, of course, stands in contrast to phenomenalism, that we only see appearances, we only know our ideas. It's realism in two senses. One, the independent existence of material objects and their qualities. The independent existence, and you'll notice this term independent used repeatedly. The independent existence, independent of minds. That is to say, the objects of our knowledge are there and exist whether we know them or not. They're not mind dependent, as Berkeley had said. So it's over against not only phenomenalism, but over against idealism as well in that sense. The independent existence of material objects, but also the belief that we have a true knowledge of that independent reality. Not only that objects exist independently, I suppose a phenomenalist could say that, but that we actually have knowledge of what it is that exists independently. The rose objectively, independently of whether we know it or not. But it also means we know it. It's that way. Direct awareness. So this theory of ideas, what does he do then with ideas? And it's obvious you've got to do something with ideas, both for the obvious reason that we play with them in our minds all the time, in reflection, in memory, and so forth. In epistemology, moreover, it is the existence of ideas that we refer to when we talk of entertaining what is not true. You see, how can I have an illusion or a misconception if there are no mental states that we call ideas? Because an illusion is a mental state that is not true to reality. A misconception is an idea that's not true to reality. So you've got to have room for ideas in addition to direct awareness. You want perhaps direct awareness in order to get at the independent reality and truth of a thing. But you've got to have ideas to account for error. So what does he do with ideas? Well, Reid's point is that when we talk of having an idea in popular language, we're referring still to direct awareness. It may be direct awareness of something that actually exists, or it may be direct awareness of an idea that we've made up, or that has arisen in our minds, sort of imaginatively constructed from memory without our being aware of it. The ideas are there. But the ideas are